Fire leapt into the night sky as men ran through the palace courtyard, clutching carved ivory and bronze plaques against their chests. A mother pulled her child close. A chief shouted orders that dissolved into smoke. Drums that once announced royal ceremonies now beat in warning. Benin City was burning. An elderly palace guard turned to a young boy hiding behind a pillar. "Remember this," he said, his voice thick with ash. "They can burn the walls. They cannot burn who we are." The boy did not fully understand. But he would. Long before that night, before foreign soldiers and gunfire, before smoke swallowed the sky, there was a forest kingdom known as Igodomigodo. In the cool shade of thick trees, elders once gathered beneath a broad tree to settle disputes. "The land must have order," one elder would say, tapping his staff gently on the earth. "And the people must have a voice," another would reply. From those conversations emerged kings known as the Ojiso, kings of the sky. They ruled with authority but were reminded often that power was a trust, not a possession. Centuries passed. Leadership weakened. Rivalries grew. Markets buzzed with quiet complaints. A trader whispered to another, "The kingdom feels restless. It needs new direction," the other answered. When the last Ojiso's line faltered, the elders made a decision that would shape history. Messengers were sent westward to request a prince from a powerful neighboring kingdom. That prince was Ovonramwen. When Ovonramwen arrived, the people gathered in cautious hope. He stood tall, observing the customs, listening more than he spoke. An elder approached him. "This land is strong," the elder said softly. "But it needs a ruler who understands both strength and humility." Ovonramwen ruled briefly, but his son would become the true foundation of a new era.
That son would be known as the first Oba of Benin.
The title Oba carried more than political authority. It carried spiritual weight. The Oba was seen as a bridge between the visible and invisible worlds. In the royal courtyard, a young prince once asked his father, "Why must the king speak carefully?" The Oba smiled faintly. "Because every word from this throne becomes law in the hearts of men." As the Oba dynasty strengthened, Benin began to transform. Roads were laid out with intention. Markets were organized. Guilds were formed, each responsible for a craft, each loyal to the palace. A blacksmith wiped sweat from his brow and told his apprentice, "Our hands serve the Oba, but our work serves history." The apprentice looked at a glowing mold and whispered, "Will anyone remember who made it?" The blacksmith chuckled. "They will remember Benin." Among the greatest rulers was Oba Ewuare. His name would echo through time not because he shouted, but because he reformed. He walked the city not as a distant figure but as a listening king. One evening, disguised in simple clothing, he stood near a group of women selling yams. "The roads flowed too easily," one woman complained. "And the taxes are heavy," another added. Ewuare listened quietly. The next month, drainage channels were improved. Certain levees were adjusted. The women did not know the stranger had heard them. But they felt seen. Under Ewuare's leadership, massive earthworks expanded around the city. Deep moats and towering embankments encircled Benin. Visitors stood at the gates in disbelief. A visiting trader once murmured, "These walls stretch farther than the eye can see." A Benin guard replied calmly, "They protect more than land. They protect identity." Life inside the walls was ordered but vibrant. Coral beads adorned the neck of the Oba, shimmering in the sunlight. Chiefs gathered in elaborate robes. Drummers announced festivals that filled the air with rhythm. A child tugged at his mother's wrapper during one such festival. "Why does everyone bow?" he asked. "Because the Oba carries our ancestors' blessings," she answered gently. In the palace, artisans worked with quiet intensity. Bronze casters melted metal using the lost wax method. Ivory carvers etched delicate patterns into tusks. Every piece told a story of battles, ceremonies, lineage. A young caster held up a newly finished plaque. "Will the Oba approve?" he asked nervously. His master examined it closely. "If your hands were steady and your heart respectful, the ancestors would smile." Benin did not isolate itself. Trade routes stretched outward like veins. Pepper, ivory, and crafted goods moved across regions. Diplomacy was deliberate. When Portuguese traders first arrived in the late 15th century, curiosity met caution. One Portuguese sailor stared at the organized streets and whispered to his captain, "This is not the wilderness we were told about." The captain nodded slowly. "No. This is a kingdom." In the palace chamber, an advisor spoke to the Oba about the newcomers. "They bring metal, cloth, and weapons," the advisor said. "And what do they seek?" the Oba asked quietly. "Trade. Influence." The Oba paused before replying. "Then we will trade. But we will not kneel." That balance, engagement without surrender, defined Benin's approach for centuries. Families thrived. Markets flourished. Festivals honored ancestors. And children grew up hearing stories of wise rulers and brave warriors. One grandmother, seated beside a small oil lamp, told her grandson, "Remember, Benin stands because its people stand together." The boy's eyes shone. "Will it stand forever?" She hesitated only a moment. "As long as we remember who we are." The city's rhythm continued, measured, confident, deeply rooted. Few could imagine that one day foreign ambitions would test that confidence. But even then, even before smoke and gunfire, Benin was more than walls and bronze. It was conversations in markets. It was laughter in courtyards. It was pride carried quietly in the posture of its people. And this was only the beginning. If this story is opening your eyes already, pause for a second and tap the like button. Stories like this deserve to travel far. And make sure you're subscribed, because this journey through history is just unfolding. The morning sun filtered gently into the palace courtyard as chiefs assembled in quiet formation. No one rushed. In Benin, decisions were not made in panic but in patience. A senior chief leaned toward another and whispered, "The visitors from across the sea have returned." "And what do they want this time?" the other asked. "More access. More trade. Perhaps more than trade." Inside the palace, the Oba listened as messengers described foreign ships anchored along the coast. "They bring gifts," a messenger said carefully. "But they ask many questions." The Oba's gaze remained steady. A man who asks many questions must be watched closely. Outside the palace walls, life moved as it always had. Women arranged peppers and yams in neat rows at the market. A young girl asked her mother, "Why do the white men wear such heavy clothes in this heat?" Her mother laughed softly. "Perhaps they are not used to our sun." The girl looked thoughtful. "Will they stay?" "For as long as trade benefits both sides," her mother replied. For decades, Benin managed its relationships carefully. Portuguese traders were allowed in controlled numbers. They admired the order of the kingdom. One Portuguese visitor wrote in his journal, "The king is powerful, the city vast, the people disciplined." In the royal workshop, artisans continued their work, unaffected by distant ships. A bronze caster adjusted a mold and said to his apprentice, "Metal must be poured at the right moment. Too early, it cracks. Too late, it hardens." The apprentice nodded slowly. "Like decisions." The master smiled. "Exactly like decisions." Meanwhile, younger chiefs debated quietly among themselves. "Trade strengthens us," one argued. "But dependence weakens us," another countered. Their voices were not raised. Disagreement in Benin was rarely loud. It was layered. Years passed. Portuguese influence faded, replaced gradually by British ambition. The British came not just as traders, but as empire builders. At a coastal outpost, a British officer spoke with a colleague. "This kingdom resists our treaties," he muttered. "They are proud," the colleague replied. "Too proud." Back in Benin City, news of British pressure reached the palace. "They demand a treaty that gives them control of trade," an advisor explained. The Oba leaned back thoughtfully. "Control is not partnership." A chief cleared his throat. "If we refuse, they may respond harshly. If we accept," another added, "we lose more slowly." The Oba's voice was calm. "We will not surrender our dignity for convenience." The tension grew slowly, like a tightening rope. In the marketplace, ordinary people sensed unease. A fisherman told his friend, "The river feels different these days." "Rivers do not change," the friend replied. "No," the fisherman said quietly. "But the boats upon them do." In 1897, a British delegation set out toward Benin despite warnings not to enter during a sacred period. Some accounts would later describe misunderstanding, others would speak of provocation. What mattered most was the result. The delegation was attacked. When news reached British authorities, outrage followed. "They have insulted the crown," one official declared sharply. "This cannot stand," another agreed. A punitive expedition was organized. Not for negotiation. Not for dialogue. For punishment. Inside Benin, rumors spread before confirmation arrived. A palace guard approached a chief in haste. "Foreign soldiers are advancing." "How many?" the chief asked. "Enough." The Oba gathered his council. "They come with anger," an advisor said. "And with weapons we have not seen before," another added. The Oba closed his eyes briefly. "Prepare the city. Protect the people." There was no dramatic speech. No thunderous vow. Only quiet resolve. Mothers hurried their children indoors. A young boy clung to his father's arm. "Will there be fighting?" His father knelt to meet his eyes. "There may be. But remember who you are." Benin's warriors prepared with courage, but they understood the imbalance. British forces carried modern rifles and heavy artillery. A young warrior whispered to an older one, "Do you think we can stop them?" The older warrior adjusted his grip on his weapon. Stopping them may not be the only measure of bravery. Gunfire eventually shattered the calm rhythm of the city. The earth that had supported festivals and coronations trembled under explosions. Inside a home near the palace, a woman covered her ears as distant blasts echoed. "This cannot be happening," she murmured. Her sister held her hand tightly. "Stay strong." As British forces advanced, resistance met them in bursts of defiance. But technology decided the pace. When the palace gates finally fell, soldiers entered spaces that had once been sacred. A British officer paused in front of a bronze plaque. "Incredible," he whispered. Another replied coldly, "Take it." Crates were filled with artwork, centuries of memory packed like cargo. In the courtyard, a palace servant wept quietly. "They are carrying away our stories," she said. A chief stood beside her, face rigid with restraint. "Stories can travel," he replied softly. "But they do not forget where they began." The Oba, facing impossible odds, chose surrender to prevent further slaughter. He was eventually exiled, removed from the city that defined him. As he departed, a small group gathered silently. A young boy, the same one who once hid behind a pillar, watched with tears in his eyes. "Will he return?" the boy asked. An elder placed a hand on his shoulder. "Leaders may fall. The spirit of a people does not." Benin City burned. Buildings collapsed. Smoke swallowed carved pillars and sacred spaces. But even in that destruction, there was restraint in the storytelling of its people. They did not scream their pain to the world. They carried it. If this part of the story is moving you, take a moment to comment below. What surprised you most about Benin's strength and dignity? Conversations like this keep history alive. And the story was not over. Because while bronzes sailed across oceans, and while exile silenced the throne, something deeper remained untouched. Memory. And memory has a way of waiting. Years passed, but the silence after the invasion never fully settled. In distant museums, Benin bronzes stood behind glass. Visitors leaned in, reading small plaques that reduced centuries into a few lines. A tourist once pointed at a bronze head and said, "It's beautiful." A curator nodded. "Yes. From West Africa." "From where exactly?" The curator hesitated briefly. "Benin." Back in Benin City, elders still gathered under evening skies. The palace grounds were quieter, but not empty. An old man traced patterns in the sand with his finger as children sat around him. "Did they take everything?" a girl asked. He shook his head slowly. "They took metal. They did not take memory." The Oba who had been exiled, Ovonramwen, lived out his final years far from the city that had shaped him. Yet even in exile, he carried himself with quiet dignity. A guard once asked him softly, "Do you regret resisting?" The Oba looked toward the horizon. A tree that bends too easily forgets its roots. When news of his passing reached Benin, grief was steady, not chaotic. Women wept in low tones. Chiefs bowed their heads. "He died away from home," one young man said bitterly. An elder corrected him gently. "Home lived inside him." Time moved forward, as it always does. British colonial rule reshaped administration and governance. Schools were built. New systems introduced. A young boy sitting in a colonial classroom raised his hand. "Sir, why do our books not mention our kings?" The teacher paused. "History is written by those in power." The boy frowned. "Then we must write our own." In family compounds, grandmothers continued telling stories of Oba Ewuare's reforms, of festivals that lit the city in coral red, of moats so vast they seemed endless. A teenage girl once asked her mother, "Why keep telling these stories?" Her mother smiled gently. "Because one day someone will ask if they are true." Decades later, Nigeria moved toward independence. Conversations shifted from colonial administration to national identity. In a crowded living room, a radio crackled with news of change. "Do you think Benin will rise again?" a young man asked his father. His father folded his newspaper thoughtfully. "Benin never disappeared. It adapted." The monarchy continued, though in a changed political landscape. The Oba remained a cultural and spiritual symbol. During a festival in modern Benin City, drums echoed once more. Coral beads shimmered under bright sunlight. A child stared wide-eyed at the procession. "Is he a king like the old stories?" Her aunt nodded. "He is part of the same story." Meanwhile, across oceans, conversations about restitution began to grow louder. Scholars questioned how artifacts had been acquired. Activists demanded return. In a European conference hall, a historian said, "These works were taken during a violent expedition." A museum official responded carefully, "We must consider legal complexities." An African scholar leaned forward. "Legal does not always mean moral." Back in Benin, a university student scrolled through articles about repatriation. "Look," he said to his friend, pointing at his phone. "They are discussing returning some pieces." His friend's eyes widened. "Do you think they will?" The student shrugged. "Maybe. But even if they return one, it matters." When the first bronzes began making their way back, ceremonies were not extravagant. They were emotional. An elder stood before a returned piece and whispered, "Welcome home." A young woman beside him wiped away a tear. "It feels like meeting an ancestor." The journey of those artifacts had become symbolic of something larger, the recognition that African civilizations had depth, sophistication, and agency long before colonial narratives tried to diminish them. In a small cafe in Benin City, two friends discussed the empire's story. I used to think history was distant, one said. And now, the other asked. Now I see it in the streets. In festivals. Even in our names. The friend nodded. It's ours. The story of the Benin Empire was never only about conquest or collapse. It was about conversations in palace chambers. About artisans shaping memory in bronze. About elders refusing to let silence erase truth. A young filmmaker once approached his grandmother with a camera. "Grandma," he asked softly, "what should the world know about Benin?" She adjusted her wrapper and looked straight into the lens. "Tell them we were organized. Tell them we were wise. Tell them we are still here." He swallowed emotion. "Anything else?" She smiled faintly. "Tell them to listen. History does not always shout. Sometimes it waits patiently for someone willing to hear it." Today, Benin City stands alive, cars moving through busy roads, markets bustling, children laughing after school. The ancient moats may not tower as they once did, but their outlines remain in the land. A tour guide pointed toward a remnant of earthwork and said to visitors, "This was once part of the greatest man-made earth structure in its time." A visitor asked quietly, "Why don't more people know?" The guide smiled. Because not every story was told fairly. And that is why stories like this matter. If this journey through the Benin Empire has moved you, inspired you, or taught you something new, take a moment right now to like this video. It helps these stories reach more people. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of Benin's story stayed with you the most? And if you want more powerful African histories told with honesty and heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. The flames that once rose over Benin City did not erase its legacy. They illuminated it. Empires may rise and fall. Art may travel across oceans. Leaders may be exiled. But identity, when gathered in conversation, in memory, in pride, endures. And somewhere in Benin City tonight, an elder is still telling a child, "Remember who you are." The child listens. And the story continues.